And although the resistance against the Nazis is growing, it is not mainly these millions of untimely deaths that is jostling people in occupied lands into action. Let us not fool ourselves. While in 1942 many are outraged and many protests have been heard by non-Jews in the still free world, and most human beings, even in Nazi Germany, would never be willing or able to carry out these barbaric acts themselves, the indifference to the plight of the Jews is for the most part a resounding silence. From the first day of the Nazi takeover in 1933, although Adolf Hitler made his intentions to end Jewry in the world known across the globe, country after country has resisted to take on Jewish refugees. Even after the outbreak of war, Great Britain, France, the Netherlands, the US, Turkey, Cuba, and many others turned back many refugees coming by train, by plane, by foot, and by boat, sometimes condemning the people on board to a death beneath the waves, and almost always sending them back to an eventual death in the gas chambers. Let us not fool ourselves to think that in almost all of the German-occupied territories there are just as many willing to help the Jews, if they only could, as there are who are now assisting in the mass genocide. Let us not fool ourselves to believe that although few people are as fanatical as the Nazis in their anti-Semitic madness, that there are not countless of millions across all the countries, both occupied and free, who agree with at least some of what the Nazis are saying about the Jews. Let us not fool ourselves to believe that anti-Semitism is a new idea in 1942. Let us not fool ourselves to believe that only a Nazi lunatic like Hitler, Himmler, or Heydrich could set out to kill the Jews. Let us remember that the millions who are dead are the victims of a dehumanization campaign that has gone on for centuries. Let us remember that the lies that have been told about them are only that, lies. Let us remember that they went to their early graves while most people turned their back. Let us remember that they were you and me, us, and now will only live on in our memories. Never forget. It is not savior, only a reprieve, but one that might save lives. Because although the wholesale slaughter of men, women, and children continues at a terrifying pace, there is change in the air. In the past 3 years, the Nazis and their allies have come down on Europe like an infestation of ravenous wolf packs, crazed by the scent of blood. Everywhere they went, they roamed free, barking, biting, and snarling at anyone in their way. In packs, they descended on the defenseless and armed alike, tearing at the flesh of humanity, devouring every last bit of decency in the world, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and desolation. Many were swept up in the frenzy and joined to feast on the blood of their neighbors. Many more, most, just cowered in fear, hoping, praying that they would not be the next victims. But now, when the world has seen that the Nazi wolves are not invulnerable, more and more have the courage to stand up against them, some with guns and bombs, some by acts of humanity to save their fellow human beings, others by simply defying the Nazi dreams of racial hegemony by making love and having a baby. Never forget. Such is the Nazi war and the defenders of the purported master races. Hiding behind the imagery of toughness, the black and silver SS uniforms, or camouflage-trousered coolness, is a posse of cowards. Their equally dilettante comrades on the battlefields on the Romanian border and in Falaise are getting their asses handed to them by farmhands, welders, school teachers, and office clerks, rallied out of towns, cities, and villages from faraway places like Irkutsk, Northumbria, Wisconsin, Manitoba, Bendigo, Bengal, and the Atlas Mountains. And now, the only victory the Waffen-SS can find is by fighting with overwhelming force against poorly armed civilians and children. Little boys and girls forced to defend themselves with arms, crawling through cellars and sewers, afraid for life and limb, terrified of a tomorrow that may never come. While these grown men, these Nazi soldiers, sit protected in their armored vehicles with radio detonators, waiting to blow up their explosives until enough children, parents, and grandparents have gathered around their bomb that it satisfies their bloodlust. Think of that the next time you see the images of the Tiki Torch marchers in Charlottesville, the racist rioters in Rostock, or the Wagner fighters in Ukraine and Syria. This, not some great dream of national and racial pride, no, this pathetic heritage of losers is what they are fighting to revive. Never forget. 1,200 days of mass murder at the camp. Close to 1,000 people were murdered every day. During the deportation of Jewish Hungarians in May and June 1944, the murders in the gas chambers peaked at over 15,000, with an average of 6,000 human beings exterminated every day. People with memories they were never allowed to share before their end, who had their lives full of sorrows and joys of existence stolen from them, only because they happened to be who they were. Brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, grandparents, uncles, aunts and cousins, children, infants, whose tears, smiles, and laughter will never echo into the next generation, because that generation was murdered with them. Echoes now only heard at the liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, where the gas chambers and the crematoria lay in ruins, and the ashes of 1 million people is in the dirt. An end that has not ended the suffering and never will. For the survivors, a deep, always burning scar was left on their souls. For the bereft, a gaping hole was left in their lives. For humanity, the camp will remain the gates that open on a deep chasm into our deepest depravities. For every act of hatred perpetuated again, for every murder of a man, woman, or child because of who they are, those gates are once again pried open a little more. Never forget. As the world celebrates victory in Europe, the ordeal of the victims of the Nazi camp system is not over. Only 500,000 have survived the camps, and as they begin a long path towards some kind of healing, we begin to count the dead. 1,700 Jehovah's Witnesses, 3,500 Spanish Republicans, between 5 and 15,000 homosexuals, mostly Germans, 20 to 25,000 Slovenes, tens of thousands of resistance members, tens of thousands of German political opponents to Nazism, 80,000 labeled as Freemasons, 270,000 disabled people, more than 310,000 Serbs, 250 to 500,000 Roma and Sinti, 1.8 million non-Jewish Poles, 3.3 million Soviet POWs, 4.5 million non-Jewish Soviet civilians, out of them 3 million Ukrainians, 6 million Jewish people from all parts of the Reich and occupied Europe. Over 17 million people of all ages, from the newborn to the aging, from all walks of life, from all continents of the planet. They are heroes among the fallen in the war against humanity. For now, the biggest battle in that war has ended in victory for humanity. But as we know, 8 decades later, that victory is fragile, and the war has never ended. To continue the fight and honor the fallen, we must never forget. Is the crucial point. 6 years of war has left Europe broken and war-weary, especially Germany. Nazi terror against its own and to inspire a population that on the whole just wanted an end to the fighting. And that is the crucial point. 6 years of war has left Europe broken and war-weary, especially Germany. Nazi terror against its own in the last months of the war has finally diluted the previously strong national resolve to fight on even further. This is where the complete defeat of Nazi Germany reaches a conclusion that might not be palatable, as it has come with massive human suffering and has in part been carried out in disregard of the laws of war and conflict, but cannot be denied. The total destruction of German cities by aerial bombardment, the massive, brutal assault on the Reich by the Red Army in the final months of the war, and the Nazis finally turning into werewolves, preying on their own, or simply evading by suicide or flight, has led to success and victory. Nazism in Germany in 1945 is defeated. Hatred has bred hatred, and those who sowed the wind have reaped the whirlwind. This is the end station of all ideologies based on fear and hatred. Sooner or later, its movement will have consumed itself and die a whinging, whimpering death, while its perpetrators run for the hills. Never forget. One of Hitler's secretaries, Christa Schröder, will remember. At 6 in the morning, when Hitler received us after the nightly situation conference, he would usually be lying exhausted on the little sofa. This is the troglodyte existence of the man who started a genocidal war that has since long turned against him. Above him, Berlin, that he once envisioned to become the monumental city Germania as capital of a sprawling racial empire, is in ruins. As March turns to April, the Allied armies to the east are standing at the Oder and to the west crossing the Rhine. Millions of soldiers wielding the biggest armory of guns, bombs, armored vehicles, heavy guns, and warplanes the world has ever seen. All of them aimed at the dismal concrete sarcophagus that Hitler now calls home. Indy and I, let us rejoice with the world, for the Führer is dead. He waged a war on humanity, and humanity answered with terrible might. A righteous might that he was too cowardly to face in person. Instead, he hid in forests, on mountaintops, and finally underground like a plague-ridden rat, while he continued to send men and women to their deaths in his stead, waiting to the last moment until all chances of a miraculous savior was gone. Then, and only then, did he pull the trigger on himself, demanding, even in death, that he was not to be held accountable for his deeds.
He was not alone in starting this war. He did not personally persecute, torture, and murder millions of people. He did not commit the genocides with his own hand. But he was the false messiah that channeled the hatred and strife, firing up the cauldrons of conflict and ordering the drums of war and the trumpets of destruction to sound the apocalypse. And while it was not only the German nation that answered that call, until not that long before his death, the large majority of Germans supported Hitler and his policies.
The Pied Piper who led humanity off a cliff is dead. Let us hope that his fearsome flute forever falters, and that one day the songs of tyranny are silenced forever. For now, the world remains at war. Berlin has not yet fallen, but Stalin's Soviet Empire is quickly overrunning Eastern Europe, while in the Far East, the rhythm of the war drums is beating ever faster. Determine how many days, weeks, or even months of war the bombs saved the world from is impossible. If it wasn't for the massive death toll and tragedy it caused, in view of what follows, it is almost a quaint question. Pandora's box has been opened, and all the evil it contained has flown out into the world. Nothing will undo this discovery, and even as the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki become known to the world, we, humanity, will not temper our worst instincts and fears. In the search for dominance, the struggle for ideological supremacy, and in fear of those who oppose and threaten us, we will perfect these weapons further. We will create bombs hundreds, even thousands of times more powerful than the ones from 1945. Bombs that in a single conflagration can wipe out not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of lives. In hardly more than a decade after these events, we will have acquired the capability of eradicating human life, most life of any kind, on the planet many times. Despite that we know the absolute devastating effect of a nuclear war, and that no sane person can even dream of launching such a conflict, despite that we swear they're not to be used only to deter someone else from using them, time and time again, by simple human error, strategic miscalculation, and accident, we will come very close. We will agree to stop testing them in the atmosphere and then not test them at all. Then we'll test anyway. We will agree to reduce the number of bombs, but never below a level that can't destroy the planet Earth many times over. And then new nations will develop their own bomb, and the great powers will again add more bombs to their stockpiles. In 2024, we will have reduced from the insane peak of 63,632 in 1985, we still have at least
12,119 nuclear warheads ready to be deployed, spread out across the United States, Russia, France, China, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. Instead of reducing that number further, we are now adding more. By some estimates, blowing up only 100 average-sized thermonuclear devices in the atmosphere simultaneously would cascade the world into an unstoppable chain reaction, making most of the planet uninhabitable for an unforeseeable future. We, as humanity, face many threats, but none as immediate as this one. We might not be able to turn back the clock to undo what has been discovered and done, but if we forget what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if we forget that the power we can now yield is the power to end time for humanity, if we allow hatred and fear to guide us forward, if we do not stand resolute against aggression and disrespect for peaceful coexistence, if we do not find a way to reduce these arms to zero, we will sooner or later all become victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Never forget.